Welcome to Conversations That Matter, another in our series of Is There a Glass Ceiling? Are there obstacles in the way for women to get to the top of whatever their career path is? Today, our guest is who?
We're going to hear from Mary Ackenhusen, Stu, to answer that question. She's the president and CEO of Vancouver Coastal Health, a huge organization that has huge impact on all of our lives here in the Lower Mainland. You know, interesting statistic as I was preparing for this, 15% in Canada of board members for the largest 500 corporations in Canada are women, 15%. The general population mix is 50-50 men and women. And a recent study shows that at the rate that we've been increasing women on corporate boards recently, it'll take us 175 years before it gets proportional.
Well, you know what's also interesting? If you take a look at middle management numbers right now, they're pretty much split 50-50 between men and women. So what's happening between middle management and senior levels?
It's really the key question. And you know, we're seeing here recently in Silicon Valley, companies like Google and others getting hammered for not having women at these senior executive positions and starting to make changes in that regard. It's like we talked about in one of our other conversations, where does this metaphor of the glass ceiling really work? Is it a barrier to entry? Not necessarily anymore. It's really more a labyrinth of obstacles, and that's the word from the Harvard Business Review recently on this topic, and I think aptly fits the challenges that people like Mary are facing.
There are specific skill sets that people who go from middle management to senior management have. And there's a lot of times women get pushed more into the softer side of the business than these business, strategic, financial aspects that Mary addresses in this conversation that we have with her.
And that's why, Stu, we're seeing such a significant emphasis on corporate boards in particular. These are the people that are making the big decisions about our large companies and their futures. Europe, Germany, most recently has actually started mandating that 30% of corporate board members must be women. And this is a growing trend in Europe, not just leaving it to companies and businesses to figure this out, but actually saying, look, you have to achieve these particular targets to address this very issue of making sure that women are represented at the highest positions in companies.
But choice comes into this as well. As Mary points out, each person, male and female, has to make decisions and choose this path. Let's go to that conversation now. Welcome. Thank you for joining me. You run a pretty impressive organization. How many people do you have working for you?
I think it's around 20,000.
20,000 people.
Right.
That's a tremendous amount of responsibility, and there are women across this country, throughout the Americas, who will look to you and say, how did you do it? How did you get to this position where you lead such an important and vital organization here in the province of British Columbia?
And the answer would be, it's very circuitous. So I'm not one that had a planned career. I was in manufacturing. I'm an engineer. Went to manufacturing, then went to France, couldn't speak the language, worked in a university there, and then finally, 15 years ago, came back into health as an executive on the facility side, and eventually worked into the clinical side, and then to be the CEO.
What's important, I think, in what you just described there is that you came back as an executive. How did you get to that level? Because if we take a look at the number of women that are in graduate programs right now, they outnumber their male counterparts. When we look at middle management, it's 50-50. But when we get to senior executive levels, those numbers are, they go sideways.
Right.
How did you get there?
I'd like to say it was pure competence. There may have been some luck there. I mean, I was coming from France into a position in the health authority at an executive level that hadn't been filled for a year, so they were looking very hard, how could they fill it? Had a video interview across the seas, and then was brought in and asked to take the position, but didn't come from healthcare, which is quite unusual to come in from outside of healthcare, but did have the engineering degree, the finance, and things that evidently were appealing. But I would say it was a bit of luck that they actually chose me, brought me over from Europe here to BC. And in fairness, my husband came over to UBC, so I was kind of the trailing spouse, so to speak, and that his job was first, and then I came second.
Mm-hmm. but you had that finance component in your experience.
Sure. Yeah.
How important is that? Because when we take a look at a movement from middle management to senior management, you have to understand how the business works and how the money works.
Right, right. I would say my background is quite unique, and certainly I have to say it has made a big difference in terms of not only what I know, but the credibility it gives me. So I have a bachelor's and a master's in industrial engineering, which is basically process improvement. It's kind of a smattering of all kinds of engineering disciplines, but very oriented toward process improvement.
But it's about how things work,
right?
Isn't it?
And then I have an MBA from Harvard Business School. So again, not so much what I learned there, though I learned some really exciting things, but it gives that immediate credibility. Oh, she knows something about finance and all these other aspects of the business world.
When you look back to the early part of your career, because one of the things that I hope from us being able to do this interview is that we're signaling to generations yet to come that you have the choice. But what are some of those choices that you have to make in order to create opportunity for yourself?
Right. I would say, I've been someone who has been, I think, very fortunate. I've been able to balance that family and career, and didn't always know I was going to be able to do that. I went through a couple-year period in France where I won't say quite in tears, but very frustrated. How am I going to resurrect my career? Here I'm in France, I don't speak the language, I followed my husband over here, and, so had my MBA, my engineering degree, and what am I going to do? But I think, without going into long detail exactly how I got out of that, a lot of it is, one, understanding you don't have to be best at everything. So we women often want to be perfectionists. And I determined, after lots of soul searching, I couldn't be the best wife, the best mother, and the most fulfilled career woman. But I could be pretty good at all of those, which doesn't sound like a huge monumental breakthrough. But for me, it was a big deal, like, oh, okay, I'm going to be pretty good at everything. And that kind of changed the whole game. And one of the important things that it changed for me that really, when I talk to young women about what makes a difference, is that ability to put your hand up and say, I'll try and do that, even when you don't know how to do it. So being able to take that risk to go beyond your comfort zone, whether it was going from healthcare or from engineering into healthcare, or in my case, once I was in healthcare, I was managing facilities, and putting up my hand and saying, I can manage clinical operations. I've never done it before, but I've watched it long enough that I think I can make a difference there. So some of the confidence to take a risk is very, very important.
There's a lot of people who won't take that risk, men or women. How much does that play a part in you being able to push yourself forward to kind of reach to the next rung, which I think is part of the process?
Yeah, I think it's really important. And I think the ability to have that internal confidence is something that has made a big difference for me. And maybe I'll talk a little bit about how I think I have that confidence. And part of it's going through an engineering program. One woman among all these men kind of helps you to figure out how to hold your own. And then going to Harvard Business School when, you're with, in my section, 90 other really bright people, and I was quite the introvert, so I didn't want to speak up a lot. But in Harvard, you have to speak up. 50% of your grade is what you say in class. So you learn to express your ideas, not knowing if they're good or bad, but being able to sell yourself. So that was an important piece. And then I guess the other thing is just, if you look at the research, which I find quite interesting, they say that while competence is important in a job, confidence is even more important. So you have to have a certain base level of competence, but the confidence is really what's going to get you over that into that next position. And confidence is actually, they say, somewhere between 25 and 50% genetic. So you may work to build your confidence skills in certain ways, environmental, like I just talked about, but there may be something genetic about it as well.
So if you look back into your own family history, did your parents help plant the seeds that allowed you to start to, even though you may have had to fight your way through that, did they help set the stage for that? Or did you do it all on your own?
Hard to tell. I was that third child out of four, so a little bit the forgotten child, and so kind of fought my way to get attention here and there. I was called the black sheep of the family because I was actually different than my brothers and sisters in many ways, personality-wise. So it's very hard to tell.
You were willing to take risks then?
Yes,
obviously.
I was. Yes.
So maybe that is part of the one of the characteristics. Sheryl Sandberg, in her fabulous talk on TED Talks, talks about the fact that men are also willing to claim ownership for the things that they've done, whereas women don't.
Right, yeah.
How important do you see that now when you look at the organization that you manage? How important do you see that as a role in helping women move beyond into the senior management positions?
I actually think it's very, very important. And it's something that I've personally had to learn over the years because it's not my natural style. And I'll tell you a little story about how I really learned it. And so I was here in BC in one of the health authorities. New CEO comes along. I'm an executive leader. New CEO is kind of looking at the executive team, wondering who to keep, how to reorganize, what's going to happen. Brings in a consultant to interview each of us as executive leaders to talk about that. I had my interview and didn't think much of it because I was doing a good job, as women often do. A good job will be enough to keep me, in my job and get me promoted. But when reorganization day came, I was told I no longer had a place on the team. So I was reorganized out because I didn't take the time to get to know the CEO, to sell the CEO on what I was doing and the good work that I had thought would be recognized. And so learned that in a very busy world, yes, you have to self-promote. Not blatantly, of course, there's lines you don't want to cross, but you do have to let people be aware of what you're doing and why it's important to the organization. And just to finish that story, because it sounds quite sad, because I left on a Friday.
It sounds like you took a step backwards, and yet I know that you've moved forward. How did you deal with that and then continue to move on?
So that was on a Friday. I went home in tears. Great husband there to help me get through it. And the surprise ending is on a Sunday afternoon. I got a call from that CEO and said, Mary, 2 of your colleagues have come to me and said that you are a very valuable member of the team, we need to keep you, and that I made a mistake, and so I'd like you to come back onto the team.
Did the CEO
How often does that happen?
Once, for sure. Was it pointed out to you that you did not do a good enough job of
No, I had to learn that myself. That was my own lesson, but no,
Yeah.
I was never told that.
Holy smokes! You talk about going home to your partner who must have been devastated for you as well. How important a role does your partner play in you being able to achieve success in your career?
He's been huge. And just to tell you, he also has a very busy career. Has traveled ever since we've been married, which is about 32 years. So they're supportive emotionally, not always physically. To the point when we were in France and my career was going nowhere, very frustrated, he was willing to move back to BC just to help me get my career going again. And again, once I was here in BC, very difficult landing, coming from France where people worked 35-hour work week, long lunches, to this very busy, long commute to Surrey. I just, at one point, couldn't do it anymore. I'd gone through 4 nannies. Nanny left the kids on the doorstep, pretty blatant issues. I was like, I just can't work anymore. I'm not being a good mother. I can't do this. And so he picked me up and said, let's figure this out together. And you go in at 6 a.m. I'll stay and get the kids off to school. And my boss at that time said, fine, you leave at 4. And so basically as an executive, I was able to have this kind of mummy hours, which allowed me to keep going in my career.
But it's also difficult, especially if we take a look at, let's say, younger women whose husband says, okay, I want to support you in your career development because your trajectory, your goals, they're different than mine. I'll stay and I'll look after the family. They pay other prices, though. Society isn't necessarily lined up to help support them take on that role.
No. It is so nuanced, isn't it?
It is.
We think women have a hard time breaking through the glass ceiling, but the men have a hard time becoming that primary caregiver. It's just as difficult.
So, you bring up the term glass ceiling. Is there actually a glass ceiling now?
Most women would say that.
That there is?
Most women would say that, and the numbers would point to that. That there are very few women in the C-suite, so to speak. That said, I think women make different choices as well. So a ceiling implies that they'd like to get through and are not able to. I think women also perhaps have different perspectives on what success is and are not as driven to get through that ceiling as perhaps men are, which contributes to the numbers being different than more men, drastically more men than women in those C-suite jobs.
Young woman, 30, 35 years of age, comes to you and says, I want to be where you are in 15 years from now. What's the most important thing that I need to do between now and then so that I have that opportunity? You know, whether I get it or not,
Yeah.
but at least I am an eligible candidate. What advice do you give?
So I go to, the competence is a given, so you need to make sure you have the right degrees or the right experiences, get all those. But it really goes back to those two things that I mentioned that were the big learnings for me. One is take risks. You have to put yourself where you're not comfortable to try new things and to show, really stretch yourself. So that's important.
Let me just stop you for one second. That's hugely terrifying, especially in a tight economy.
Yeah, it is.
People go, oh, really? Like, you want me to put myself out there? What if I get it wrong? And that's the hard part.
It is. It is. It goes to where you work and who you work for and how important it is to pick that employer that you feel represents those kind of values. So one of the things, which is easy to say now that I am in the CEO position, that I'm trying to create is that culture that allows for failure and acknowledges that stars don't become stars unless they've tripped up a few times and learned those lessons and have the confidence to go beyond the sandbox that we've given them. That's how we get really dynamic performance for corporations, whether they're not-for-profit or private. But you're right, it's not easy. And that's why everybody's not going to make it to the top. But that would be one piece of advice. And then the other is really that's whether you call it self-promotion or networking or somehow making sure people realize the importance that you bring to your job, to your organization. Don't leave it to chance because it won't happen necessarily. People are very busy.
Susan Colin-Tuno, in her book No Ceiling, No Walls, talks about these three components that are also vitally important, which is business, strategic, and financial acumen. And when you look at your career, you were able to get that kind of experience and glean insight from each of those things. Men kind of get pushed into that almost as though it's a given, whereas women, especially when they're at that middle management level, get pushed more towards the softer side of management. How do they take control of their own environment and say, no, I got to get over here? What role does a mentor play?
Certainly a mentor could be very important. And I would say my mentor, and I probably should have mentioned that early on, I had a mentor very early on that was instrumental. He was the head of my engineering department back in West Virginia University. That's where I went. And he was the one that pushed me to Harvard Business School. I never would have applied. And he also pushed me to be more of a general, led to my general management skills. So he said, engineering's not enough. You need to read Time Magazine, The Economist. You need to take political science courses. You need to be something much bigger and more holistic than an engineer.
A well-rounded human being.
Right, a well-rounded human being.
Yeah.
So that was very instrumental. It's not quite what you were referencing because my education gave me a lot of the finance, the hard technical skills, but it didn't give me the soft skills or the more well-rounded human being skills. So that was really what he helped me to achieve.
When we look at the corporate landscape, when we look at corporate governance, is there a special element that women bring to senior executive levels, to the boardroom, that make for better organizations?
Well,
and it's probably a tough, I know.
It's
tough. I ask it, I go, okay, how do you answer that?
I know what the research says.
Yeah.
I don't know if I 100% believe it. The research would say that women are more collaborative, that they're more holistic in their attitudes, I don't know if that's true or not. I think men are often that way too. So I feel very uncomfortable saying that's what women bring, even though that's what the research would say is different. And maybe it used to be that women used to manage in a more aggressive, perhaps directive manner, similar to men or what men were perceived to manage like 20 years ago. But I think that's changing both for men and for women, that women are perhaps managing in a more directive manner, aggressive manner, and men are managing in a perhaps more holistic manner. And so the styles, in my mind, aren't as different as perhaps they used to be perceived to be.
Where do you, from your perspective, think we're going as far as women being able to more women move up from middle management into the senior levels. Because as I understand it right now, Canada, we're kind of going backwards a little bit from where we were 10, 15 years ago. How does it look to you?
Right, and that's where I wonder if that's by choice or by lack of opportunity. And I think, as I said before, that women maybe don't want as badly those CEO jobs as maybe a man does. They have other things that are also very, very important in their lives. And so when they have choices, their choice, might be a little bit different. So my perspective or my feeling is that still in our society, men are expected to achieve, to be the primary breadwinner, at least the equal breadwinner to the wife, and that's very important too. Women can find success in different ways. It's great to have a fantastic career, that is success. It's also great to have a family, and a lesser career, that's success also. So they can make different trade-offs, perhaps, have more leeway.
So do you think that collectively we have to get away from this idea that that we say, because there's more men in the executive suite, somehow there is inequity, and recognize that it's a complex situation?
Well, I recognize it's a complex situation. And while I say that, some women may be choosing of their own volition not to go that next level, there's some women who are not choosing. So I will say there is still a bias. One of the things that I always find amazing, and again, it goes back to the reference you made to Sheryl Sandberg. She was the first person that said it that I had heard, that it's difficult for women to be successful. And she talks about the research where there is a negative correlation between success and likability for women, while there's a positive correlation for men. So a successful man is a well-liked man. A successful woman, not so much.
And you've seen that?
I would say I feel that sometimes, yes. What can you say?
I start to go, okay, why? Like, why do we do that? Like, and
It's
it would
probably
take a PhD.
centuries of genetic programming or something, who knows? But it's just not the norm. It's not what we expect of women. And it's going to take more than 50 years or however long it's been where women have really been becoming increasingly more prominent in the workplace to change that, evidently.
But you are setting an example that other women can look to and say, it's possible, and if I want it, I can strive for it. Opportunities do exist, whereas 50 years ago, they may not even have existed.
Absolutely, that's so true.
We are moving forward.
We are moving forward. There are opportunities.
Well, I wish you all the success in the operation of Vancouver Coastal Health, which is an incredible organization. And,
Thank you.
And thank you for taking the time to...
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.